Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. So today I wanted to share the best books of 2024 for me. So those are the books that I rated 5 stars, that I really enjoyed, and these are not all just like masterpiece classic literature or anything like that. Although those are on here, some of the books are just books that meant a lot to me, and it, sometimes it's time and it's what kind of mood I'm in, so it's all subjective. But anyway, these are the books that I really remember enjoying the whole read, the whole process of reading these books. And so I do have them in an order, but they could be switched around again depending on the mood I'm in. So I'm going to start with number 16, and there's no reason that there's 16 on this list. They were just, I looked over the books that I had read, I picked out 5-star reads, and then I kind of looked at, which ones I wanted to really talk about that really stand out for me, and there happened to be 16 on that list. This probably is all the 5 stars I gave. I didn't give many 5-star last year out of the 100 or so books that I read, but I don't know, last year just didn't seem like I had the best reading year. I mean, I'm thankful for these books and it was worth it for that, but I had a lot of books that were just meh for me. And I have been thinking a lot about that and how I want to make this year a better reading year than last year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that probably in part 2 of this video, and I'll try to explain that at the end. I'm just going to see how much time this takes. Okay, so number 16 is one of the last books I read at the end of the year, and that is Miracle on 34th Street by Valentine Davies. Now, I read this, I actually chose this for a group read for my Very Vintage Christmas readathon, which, by the way, I really enjoyed. Thank you for those that participated. I really didn't do a follow-up on that because I just ran out of time. And then at the beginning of the year, I ended up with the flu. And so I am just starting to get back into the swing of things because I don't get sick like that. I don't usually have, bad colds or flu or any of those things. I think this is the second time in my whole life that I've had the flu. And so it really just, I started getting to feeling better, and then I ended up starting to feel bad again. And I'm still a little stuffy, but I thought I'm going to have to go on there at some point and talk about my best books. So I apologize if my voice sounds a little different, or if I'm, talking through my nose or something. But anyway, I didn't get a chance to finish talking about the Very Vintage Christmas because there was just too much at Christmas, and then at the beginning of the year I did get sick, and so I'm just getting back to normal. So anyway, this was a favorite. I loved it. It's not very long, and it is the movie. There is a film adaptation. There's an old film adaptation from, I think, 1947, which was when this was published. That one is this book. But then there's another one that came out that I've always loved. I think it came out in the 2000s. I'm not sure. But it came out later on that I've always watched. I've always loved it because the music and the costumes and everything are just so beautiful on that. So this was a highlight for me. Again, I was familiar with the story, so that made it great. It was Christmas, and I love Christmas. And it was just a wonderful read and a great one to end the year with and to celebrate Christmas. So that is number 16, and it was published in 1947. Number 15 is a Newbery winner, and it was the Newbery winner. I'm not sure. I think it was the Newbery winner this past year. Yeah, because this was published in 2023, so it would receive the Newbery the following year. And that is The Eyes and the Impossible by Dave Eggers. This is a fabulous middle grade book. I absolutely loved it. If you love books that are told from the animals' perspective, if you love animals like I do, this one is set in a park, and it's told through the eyes of, I think he's a coyote. At the beginning, he thinks he's just a dog, but I think he ends up being a coyote in the book. But it was just wonderful. It was a great, he had the best voice. That's just what I want to say about this one. His voice, his perspective was just absolutely wonderful, and I could not put this one down, so I had to mention this one. And again, it was the Newbery for this past year. And then number 14 was one that I was excited to share, and that was Ariel Kuster. I think I read this at the beginning of the year, by Grace Livingston Hill, and it was published in 1925. So this is an oldie goldie, Ariel Kuster. It has that plastic on it, so I apologize. But there is a little picture on there you can see that I think's sweet. And this was fantastic. That's why it's on the list. This was my second Grace Livingston Hill. And now I have a lot of Grace Livingston Hill to go through. I've had some given to me, and then I've been finding some at library sales and things. So I have a whole shelf now to go through Grace Livingston Hill. And I am loving her work. And again, this is only my second one. But this one was different than the first one I read. The first one I read was A Christmas Story, and I really enjoyed it, so that's why I wanted to read more. And I'd found this one at a library sale, and I already had it on my shelf, so that's why I chose it. But this one takes a twist in the middle of the story where there's this great mystery, and I was not expecting that, and so I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend Ariel Kuster. Okay, let's see what's next. Oh, this one was so much fun. Elizabeth from Lizzie Faye Loves Books. She's been telling me to read this for so long. This is one of her favorite, it might be her favorite series. I think it is. Series, and this is the first one. It's called Miss Julia Speaks Her Mind by Anne B. Ross. And this was a highlight for my year because it was introducing me to a new series. So I have several of these already on my shelf to read. And it was just good fun. It's just humorous. It's Southern humor. And I really get that humor because, well, I'm from the South. And so everything that she talked about and all the humorous things that happened, I definitely could relate to. There were so many, I mean, I've tabbed this thing up because there were so many little phrases and things that just, you know, I just knew and recognized because I say them myself. So I thought this was such a hoot. I loved it. And it mentions several places that I know that are familiar to me because it's set, I think, in North Carolina. And I'm in South Carolina. So, of course, I was familiar with some of the places that it mentioned. So this was great. Now, I have not read any more of the Miss Julia series, but again, I do have some on my shelf. This was published in 1990. And so I have more of these to go, and so I need to get busy on these. But I did enjoy that, and that was a great start to a new series for me. Oh, and this one, y'all, I loved this. Now, this is because I've talked about wanting to read Susan Branch for years. I followed Susan Branch's website. I have checked out things from the library that were like cookbooks and things, but I've never read her memoirs. And so one of you sent me one of hers and told me I must read this book first before I read the next one, because this is the first of her memoirs, and it's called The Fairy Tale Girl. And this, y'all, is so good. If you love memoirs and you are one that enjoys journaling and you know, any kind of creative planning or scrapbooking or anything, that's how this is set up. It looks like a scrapbook, and she has her art in here and her own handwriting. She has little, there's photographs from her life. It's just beautiful. So the book itself is beautiful, and if you're a creative person or like those kinds of scrapbooking kinds of things, you would love this. But it is a memoir, and it's just starting out her journey as a young adult, and then the next book continues her story. So this is the first in a series, and I do recommend starting with The Fairy Tale Girl. But it was fantastic. I loved it. So I just realized that I did not talk about this one, Martha's Vineyard, Isle of Dreams by Susan Branch. This one is the next one. I am so sorry. As I was editing, I realized I had left a whole book out. So I just talked about The Fairy Tale Girl, and this one was the next one. This one, to me, was even better than The Fairy Tale Girl. And I think it's because I was already familiar with Susan Branch's story, and this just continued that. And it's her time moving into a little cabin on Martha's Vineyard, and I just found it to be cozy and just everything I wanted. So I failed to mention this one, but this was a best book of 2024 as well. And then the next one, number 10, And again, I have these in an order, but I don't know. Maybe not. Not really. So the next one is a D.E. Stevenson. As you know, I want to read all of D.E. Stevenson's work, and she has a lot, so I have a long way to go. But this one is from the Daring Family series. There are 3. I think it's a trilogy. This one is number 2, and it was published in 1950, and it's called Music in the Hills. And I've read the whole series, and I read the last one in the series, but I didn't know that it was a trilogy, or I would have started at the beginning. And I loved it so much, and so this year I picked up the first and then the second in this series. And again, it's called the Daring Family series. But this one was my favorite. I loved all 3. I think I might have gave all 3 of those books 5 stars. But this one was the most memorable. I loved the main character most of all in this story. And I don't know if maybe it was because it was the last one in the series for me. Again, this is only the second in the series, but for me it was the last one, and I had come to know these characters so much. That could have been it. Because you know, the more time you spend with favorite characters, the more and more you love the story. And so that might be why I rated this as my favorite out of the series, but it was a favorite for last year. So I did love that one. And again, I'm trying to read all the D.E. Stevenson. I have several more still on my shelf to read, so I want to read those first, of course, and then I'll get to the others, hopefully. Okay, that was number 10. So number 9 is an Agatha Christie, and this one was such a surprise for me. It's called Death Comes as the End. And this was a surprise because this is actually historical fiction for Agatha Christie. And it's set in Egyptian times. And it is super interesting. I did not know how I was going to feel about this one when it started. And I knew that, you know, it was historical fiction because that's so different for Agatha Christie. But wow, she really did a great job on this one. And I highly recommend Death Comes at the End. This was published in 1944, and again, it was a highlight of my Agatha Christie journey. Again, I'm trying to read all of Agatha Christie too, and so this was one. I think this is a standalone, and I'm trying to read all the standalones, and I think I have one left, so I'm excited about that. So then I could rank all the standalones. So, and then I'll move on to Hercule Poirot. Now, I've read some Hercule Poirot, but only a handful, so I have a long way to go again. But anyway, this was a highlight for me, and this was published in 1944. Then the next one is Victorian. It was a Victorian favorite for me, and that was an Anthony Trollope, and it was Dr. Wardle's School. Now, I say Wardle School, but it might be Wardle School. But for me, it's easier to say Wordle as in turtle. So I say Dr. Wardle School. But this is by Anthony Trollope. It is a standalone, and it was published in 1879. This was a page turner. I was just so, I don't know, invested in this, and I read this very quick for Victorian. Victorian literature usually takes me a lot longer, but this one did not. It reads, to me, it read more like a contemporary read. Now, I do read a lot of Victorian literature, so for me, it might not read, if you don't read a lot of Victorian classics, you might not feel that way, but for me, it read a lot more contemporary, a lot more accessible for today's reader than a lot of other Victorian works to me. I really enjoyed this one, and it was again published in 1879. And the next one is Victorian. That is another Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is yet another one of my, what I'm calling the author to zero, trying to read every piece of work that they've written, and I'm trying to read right now all of the Charles Dickens novels. And this, by the way, is my copy of Nicholas Nickleby. And I want to stop here before I talk about Nicholas Nickleby because it is number 7 on my list, and it was published in 1839. It's one of his earlier works. But a couple of you have asked me, you've messaged me and asked me about this edition, and I've talked about it before, but you liked it too. See how beautiful that is? How that spine is so beautiful. And that's the cover. It has the Charles Dickens CD initials. And it's really a beautiful, hefty book. But several of you have noticed it on my shelf or heard me talk about it, and you've asked what edition this is. And this is called the Heritage Press edition, published in New York, I think. And I love these. And I have the whole collection because my husband, over time, gradually picked them up and would give them to me for birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas, whatever. And he looked high and low and found every one. So now, thankfully, I have the whole set of this Heritage Press collection. But if you're interested, that's what it's called, the Heritage Press. And I love them. And they are like a storybook. The reason I enjoy these... Now, somebody recently asked me what I preferred reading, how I preferred reading Charles Dickens, like in what edition. And I do love reading it in this, but I will say some of his books I have read in the Penguin paperbacks, those black and white paperback, the Penguins, because it's a floppy edition and I can take notes. And these I'm not going to write in because they're beautiful. But this feels like a storybook. I feel like I am reading a bedtime story when I read this. I don't know why. It does have some illustrations scattered throughout, but it just the way that it opens and feels, I don't know. I'm trying to find a picture for you so you can see what I'm talking about. But there's just something about reading from this. I like this Heritage Press, and then I have like a few Jane Austen, I think it is. Here's an illustration, and see, it has these illustrations on the side, and then you have, this font is great. You got plenty of white space in the margins. It's just it's a joy to read out of these. And I think there is something to having a great edition to read out of, because I've read some of these books that are out of publication. People have taken them out of the goodness of their heart. I'm not, knocking them for trying, but it's hard to open the book, or the font's so small, or they take all the way out to the end of the page and, there's no white space, no margins. It's hard to read those, and I don't experience the book in the same way as I would a great edition. So I do recommend finding you if you're wanting to read through Charles Dickens or somebody else, try to find a really good edition, because that to me is part of the enjoyment of the read. So anyway, I say that because a couple of you have asked me about my journey through Charles Dickens and the edition that I enjoyed reading from. So that's that question. Okay, so back to my list. This is Nicholas Nickleby, and again, it was published in 1839. This was the last book of the year. Well, actually, I did read Christmas Carol, but I read that every year. And I said I wasn't going to read it this year, but I couldn't stand it. I think New Year's Eve I read A Christmas Carol. But anyway, the last week of December, I did finally finish Nicholas Nickleby. I buddy read this with Faith from Faith and Books, and we tried to read this together along with another book I'll talk about later. But we had started out great, and then we both had Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we both got, busy with other things. She ended up finishing both before New Year's, but I didn't finish but Nicholas Nickleby before New Year's. So that's why that one is on this list, because the other one was really good too, but I can't talk about it because I didn't finish it till January. But anyway, this was fantastic. I love Nicholas Nickleby. I am so surprised, though, that I enjoyed it so much, because I don't hear anybody talk about this one. I know it was one of his earlier works, but I don't hear much about it, and so I just assumed it must not be that great. But I enjoyed it and gave it 5 stars. So, I will be sharing a complete review on Nicholas Nickleby, so I'm not going to say anything because I'm trying to just get through this list. But this was a highlight, and I was glad that the end of my year ended on such a high note, because I finished Nicholas Nickleby and I reread A Christmas Carol for the umpteenth time. So that was great. So Nicholas Nickleby was number 7. We have another Agatha Christie. Number 6 on this list is The Pale Horse. This is so good. I loved this. It was such a great one. It's so different than any of the other Agatha Christie's I've read. It's up there with And Then There Were None. So far, that is my favorite, and this one's up there with it. It is such a good one. And it is darker and more of a darker gothic feel, like And Then There Were None. This one was a highlight. I loved it so much. I read this with Janet. Janet zoomed right through it because it was a reread for her. But I took a little more time because I was just savoring it, and it was just so good. So we did discuss this one, and I enjoyed this so much. And this was published in 1961. And again, this is a standalone, so that helped with my project of getting through the standalones first for Agatha Christie. Number 5, y'all, this was a great one too. And as they go, they're better and better. This was Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. This was published in 1957, and I read this with Art, as I read all Ray Bradbury. So we read Ray Bradbury together, and I loved it. And I think Art enjoyed it even more now that he's older, because this really deals with time and memory. And it was fantastic. Just like every other Ray Bradbury, all the chapters are like little short stories, but this is a novel, and so all the short stories tie in together and tell one full story. And I love Ray Bradbury. I love the way that he thinks about time or any other subject that he's talking about. Anything that he writes is just so thought-provoking, and I recommend buddy reading Ray Bradbury. If you pick up a Ray Bradbury, grab somebody else to buddy read it with you, because it's fantastic reading it with someone else. And I love that I read it with Art, because he loves Ray Bradbury so much. And because they're rereads for him, he can pull out things that maybe I'm not noticing. So I highly recommend buddy reading Ray Bradbury with someone else. But this was a great one. And then I think I have another one it's kind of like a little series, I think, of books. Farewell Summer, I think that's what it's called, is the final one in the little series of Ray Bradbury that I need to read. Now, I have plenty more Ray Bradbury to read, but I think that's the next in that series. Number 4, I don't think I have a copy of it here because it's up on my shelf and I didn't bother to grab it. And that is a Shakespeare play. It was The Merchant of Venice, and that was published in, we think, 1596. And I really enjoyed that so much. In fact, I have pulled 3 more Shakespeare plays to read this next year, because I'm really enjoying Shakespeare. But The Merchant of Venice, I am still thinking about. Why does no one talk about that one? You hear about all the others. More, I think, Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet and Macbeth, they're fantastic. But wow, The Merchant of Venice, if you have not read The Merchant of Venice, go read it. It's a great one. And so I really did enjoy that. And then number 3 is one that I ended at the end of the year too, and that was Winter Fire by Ryan Whittaker Smith. But this is writings, essays about Christmas written by G.K. Chesterton. And so this Mr. Smith has compiled all of these essays that G.K. Chesterton wrote during his lifetime in journals and articles and things about Christmas. And then he goes and kind of responds to those writing. So he has a little writing in there. And then you have like a scripture reading, so you can use it for Advent. At the back are the essays that he refers to. And then there's also some other things at the back that are like Victorian Christmas games, Victorian Christmas recipes, and things like that, that made it even more special. So I highly recommend this. It made me want to read more G.K. Chesterton. I've only read like 1 book by G.K. Chesterton. Well, no, 2, because I did read the Father Brown mysteries. So I need to pick up more. And I do have 1 classic on my list this year of G.K. Chesterton, because I do want to read more of his books. But I highly recommend this for Christmas time. Again, it is about Christmas, and it's great for Advent too. Okay, and then I have, and this was published in this was published in 2023, but it is the writings from the early 1900s of G.K. Chesterton. So just keep that in mind. It's not a 2023 writing style. It is from the early 1900s, because it is G.K. Chesterton's essays. Okay, I'm on number 2. My camera died. Onward and Upward in the Garden by Catherine White. This was published in 1979. I think it was published after her death. Her husband, E.B. White, who you know from Charlotte's Web, I think he had this published because these were her writings from when she was an editor for a newspaper. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, she was an editor, and so she had these essays about gardening in those journals. I think it was a journal. Can't remember exactly, or a newspaper. So anyway, I loved this so much because it was the highlight for my spring. I would go out every morning, listen to the birds. I had hummingbirds around too at that time, and I would read a little by little of this book. It's about her purchasing her seeds and planning for her garden. And it was just perfect for me for springtime because I do love gardening. So this was wonderful. I highly recommend it. If you're a gardener, you'll love this book. And my favorite read for 2024, drum roll please, this is by far my favorite read. I loved all of these other books, but this was the best read of 2024. You're probably already guessing, and that was Uncle Silas by Sheridan Le Fanu. And I loved it so much that my husband bought me a beautiful new copy of this because I've talked about it so much. And he bought me 2 other books written by this author. So I plan to read some more of his this year. So I am so excited for my new author to try because I love this so much. I know he's written some short stories too, but this is, it just has everything I love. It's Victorian. It's gothic. There is a mystery. You're trying to figure out what's going on during the story. And it is a page turner. It had everything I wanted. It was just atmospheric, and I loved every minute of it. It was one of those books I couldn't wait to pick up and read every day. And when I was finished, I was sad that I was done. So this was definitely the highlight for last year, and I want to find more like this. So that leads me to let you know about part 2 of this video. And I won't have time because I've talked too much in this one. I tried to hurry. But in part 2, I'm going to talk to you about how I looked at these favorite reads for 2024 to help me decide what to read in 2025. So stay tuned for part 2, and I will see you soon. In the meantime, let me know in the comments what was your best book for 2024. I'd love to know, and let me know if you've read any of these too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.